I want to take you in this image back 160 something years ago to Mare Street, Hackney, and we're looking at of course, the railway bridge and the lovely Victorian people bopping around. We're looking at the church tower of St Augustine's, and just beside it, the church tower of St John's at Hackney. The church tower of St Augustine's is all that remains of the old St Augustine's church at Hackney, which would later become St John's at Hackney. That church was pulled down, leaving only that bell tower in place, and a new church was built for larger capacity as the Industrial Revolution grew, so the numbers of church goers and people needing to be buried in the churchyard grew as well, hence the knocking down and the rebuild. But I wanted to start us off with this image in the past, because in our next part I can stand in more or less exactly the same angle 160 something years later in 2024 and get the same view of that church tower. So join me in 2024 for that now.
And there we are, pretty much with the same view. 1860 to 2024. Quite a lot has changed in that time, of course, but I thought I'd start us off with the old view and start us off in the present. So you'll now join me over at St Augustine's Tower, which is all that remains of St Augustine's, or the old St John-at-Hackney Church. So join me over there. And here we are, looking at St Augustine's Church Tower, which is literally all that remains of the old St Augustine's or St John-at-Hackney's Church. I covered this one a little while ago in my Samuel Pepys trail, the bell tower climb. If that's something you'd like to see, click the link in the description box. But the church itself went in, the main body of it went this way, so that is where I shall take you, over this way. And here, there it is, just over here, there are stones that mark where the body of the church was. There's one there, and there's another one over here. So we're basically walking within the old body of the church. But you will get to see what the interior looked like. There are some images. This stone marks the site of the northeast corner. It wasn't a very, very massive church, but over here, I'm just pointing you at now, is the Rowe family tomb. This was within its own chapel. They had a chapel built around this tomb. Inscriptions are very, very much a long worn away. Little bits and pieces you can see, but tomb of the Rowe family. St John-at-Hackney Churchyard Gardens. A large tomb before you is what remains of the Rowe Chapel, built in 1614 as a mausoleum for the Rowe family, who were lords of the manor. The chapel formed the south-east corner of the old church. 3 members of the Rowe family became Lord Mayor of London, a post which is held for 1 year. Thomas Rowe was elected in 1568, William Rowe in 1592, and Sir Henry Rowe in 1607. When the church was demolished in the late 1790s, the Rowe Chapel was kept because at the time it was privately owned. The structure was enclosed and given a new roof, but needed repairs in 1835. In 1877 an arch collapsed and killed the sextoness, and in 1896 the roof and walls were demolished and the decorative wall-mounted Rowe monuments were relocated to the new church, where they can still be seen. This photograph taken in around 1880 showing the Rowe Chapel on the left and St Augustine's Tower in the background. So that's the row chapel, what it was. And this is it on the layout of the church here. And that's all that remains of the church, is the tower, so the rest of that is gone. But never fear, you can have a look and see what it's like in the past. So off we go for that.
And as promised, I'll look back of what St Augustine's of the past looked like. A lost church, and we get to see the exterior and interior of this one. But this lovely painting from the mid-1600s I like for several reasons. One, because of course it shows us our old church and the Hackney of that era, which was very, very different indeed. Two, because as an ardent Samuel Pepys addict, I must admit, it shows us the Hackney and the St Augustines that he would well have remembered and known from his boyhood, when he and his brother were sent to stay with Goody Lawrence for the good of their health in the countryside, which Hackney was. And lastly, because like with our image that we began with from the 1860s, our painter of this image would have stood in roughly the same position as our painter from the 1860s, and the same position that I stood in 2024. And I absolutely love that kind of continuity. It's not always that you can do that, because buildings come and go, but with this tower and its alignment and this image and the other ones I've shown, we've been able to do that through the eras, and I like that. The parish church of Hackney became a sinecure rectory in 1275. This meant there was a vicar and a rector representing the parish, both positions being in the gift of the Bishop of London, and the parish served the entire area of the present London borough of Hackney until the parish was eventually divided up in the 18th century. From the 14th to the 17th century, the church was dedicated to St Augustine, and here we get to see an interior image of what the old St Augustine's was like, with its arches and monuments, courtesy of Hackney Archives. And another interior image, slightly more detailed, this one. And I love this because, as I say, it's a lost church, and it's good to get to see exactly what they were like, and it's not always that you can get to see what the interior of a lost church was like. These images were done basically when they knew the church was done for. People took these images, and thank goodness they did. Another one courtesy of Hackney Archives. And the so-called Row Chapel, which you can see to the extreme left of this image from the 1880s, which is properly a mausoleum and was built on the south side of the chancel in 1614 to encapsulate the Rowe family tomb. The Rowe family produced 3 Lord Mayors of London. This is their tomb as we see in 2024, a bit moss and lichen covered and careworn, but there nonetheless. And those 3 Lord Mayors of London. Here you have Sir Thomas Rowe, who was Lord Mayor of London from 1567 to 1568, and with his wife Lady Mary Rowe. And this is from their monument, formerly in the south aisle of Hackney Church. Then you have their son, the monument of Sir Henry Rowe, Knight, in Hackney Church. And this is the man himself, Sir Henry Rowe, who followed directly after his father and was Lord Mayor of London from 1568 to 1569. And last but not least, you have the grandson, Sir William Rowe, ironmonger and Lord Mayor of the City of London, 1591 to 1592, his tenureship. And Goody Lawrence, who Samuel Pepys and his brother were sent to stay with for the good of their health. Now, with some massive help from history friends, and some even greater help from the lovely lady at Hackney Archives, who I really appreciate. She did a quick look up for me and didn't charge, and I appreciate that. We've been able to put a name to Goody Lawrence, who was actually Barbara Lawrence. Now this is the entry from Find a Grave, and it's a mistranscription as Barbary Lawrence. Now, in that era, no Christian would have taken their child into a church and had them christened Barbary, and no vicar would have agreed to do it, because Barbary is or was a nickname for the devil. So thank you to the lovely lady at Hackney Archives who did a quick look up for me. Barbara Lawrence, as she actually was buried on the 14th of September 1663. No other details are given than that, so it's just nice to put a name to Goody Lawrence and who she actually was. In Tudor times, many members of the court used the church, including Sir Ralph Sadler of Brick Place, now Sutton House. If you've watched my tour of Sutton House, you'll have seen the house and the man himself inside, a lovely portrait of Sir Ralph. And Samuel Pepys, of course, who visited the church in 1667 and recorded as much in his diary, where he complimented the fine pair of organs, regretting that his own church of St Olave's didn't have them, and where he also enjoyed ogling many of the girls from the local schools, of which there were many in Hackney in those days. From 1660 or thereabouts, the church was rededicated to St John of Jerusalem, St John the Baptist, and known as St John-at-Hackney, representing links of the parish with the Order of St John of Jerusalem. The constant increasing of Hackney's population, largely due to the Industrial Revolution, meant that galleries were added to the church, and by 1789 it was able to hold a congregation of upwards of 1,000. This was still inadequate to the needs of the parish, and on the advice of the architect William Blackburn, the vestry petitioned Parliament in 1790 for the church's complete rebuilding at an adjacent site to the north. Here we see Hackney Brook and St John's, our 1690 image. Here we see it 1660 image, sorry, I beg your pardon, the portrait that we had. Here we see it 1790, and not too much has changed in that time. We've still got your brook and you've still got the church, and it would later become Mare Street, where I was able to stand and take my image. And here you see that parliamentary bill from the reign of King George III, an act for the taking down of the church and tower, thank goodness they didn't do that, belonging to the parish of St John at Hackney in the county of Middlesex, and for the building of another church and tower for the use of said parish, and for the making an additional cemetery or churchyard. Blackburn died suddenly in November 1790. James Spiller, a friend of John Soane, was chosen from 6 architect candidates to replace him as the designer of the new church. After the building of the new church, the body of the old church was pulled down in 1798, with many of the monuments preserved in the new church of St John-at-Hackney. The stone was sold as building material. The extent of the original church was marked with cornerstones to the edges and corners of the church. The tower remained to house the 8 bells of Hackney. These were finally relocated in the new church in 1854, after the new church tower was underpinned to take the great weight. And here we see the old St Augustine's in the process of being pulled down. In 1797 to 98 that process occurred. And here we see a more detailed portrait of the same thing happening. You can see the workmen and people standing by and watching. Many of the locals were quite sad to see their old church go, and they weren't keen on the new one. Because don't forget, although the Hackney St John's, which we will see, is a beautiful Georgian era church to us, to those people of that era, it was brand new architecture. Like how many of us feel about the new and modern buildings of today, many of them would have felt about the church that we're going to go and see. 1812, and I like this image because it shows old over to the right with St Augustine's tower, with the new over to the left with St John's. And as you can see in this image, it hadn't got its bell tower or its porch. When they built this much larger church, they ran out of money before they could build the bell tower and the porches. The bell tower was added in this very year of 1812 and the porches added in 1813. And the reason they had to wait so long to move the bells is the bell tower that they built wasn't adequately enough underpinned to take the great weight of the bells from the old medieval bell tower that we see here in this lovely 1860s portrait or image that I just couldn't resist ending off with. So the medieval people knew how to build well, didn't they? 1860s, 2024. And to which year I shall drag us kicking and screaming back. So off we go back into 2024.
And a very good early Sunday morning to you, ladies and gents. I've dragged us kicking and screaming back into 2024. And on the following Sunday from when the first snippet was filmed, arrived much earlier today because this place gets busy throughout the day. So I wanted to capture it while it wasn't too busy. Here is where the house of Christopher Erswick stood. Christopher Erswick was priest and confessor to Lady Margaret Beaufort, my Lady the King's mother. He was also rector of Hackney Church as well, so that's why his house was there. So I'll take you around this way. This is a two-part of this one. It's old and new, this being the old church, and the new one we shall be seeing in a bit if you want to watch that. Churchyard tour of this one, very, very interesting. This is just one of the graves that's covered. This stone marks the site of the northwest corner of the original parish church. And we are now walking in its original parish churchyard. When the new church was built, they massively extended the churchyard. They bought 2 fields that were owned by a butcher and a tallow chandler, because as I said and I've said before, the Industrial Revolution really vamped things up a lot population wise, and they had not enough room to cope with the church numbers or burial numbers, hence the rebuild and the extension to the burial ground. And I shall hop us up on here, walk us over this way to take you to an interesting piece of this church's history. It was mentioned when I spoke about the Rowe family tomb, which is just there. To be careful I don't tread in anything nasty. So off into church after I'm done here. Now, the Rowe family, their tomb, we covered that. Always like to cover everyone. Obviously, the Rowes were wealthy notables and worthies and such like. I like to also cover the ordinary man and, in this case, woman. Where this tomb is, the Rowe family tomb, there was once a chapel, a mortuary type of chapel, mausoleum chapel. And I'm going to take you to a little interesting piece of its history and why it is no longer here. There we are, Cadgett's church bell ringing. And the bit of history I want to take you to. You remember the Rowe Chapel, which is just there. It's a mausoleum chapel. St John's Church fatality, Hackney, December 1877. A singular accident occurred at St John's Church in Hackney which resulted in the death of a sextoness, Elizabeth Goodwin, aged 56. Now, this is where I find her really interesting. A sexton is a gravedigger, basically. So to get a female gravedigger is quite unusual, and it isn't a one-off in this church's case. The old St Augustine's church, in which we're looking at where it was here, in the 1600s, had a sextoness then. So that's interesting. She was 56. The sextoness, and also in the charge of the keys of the mausoleum, that's what we're talking about, the Rowe mausoleum. Two gentlemen arrived one day and wished to enter the Marquis of Downshire vault, which had not been opened for a century or more. Goodwin took Mr. Atkinson and Mr. Buck into the mausoleum, and while they were casting an eye over it, they walked over a stone slab which promptly collapsed and sent them 12 feet below. A ladder was produced and Mr. Buck came straight out with a slight head injury, but Elizabeth Goodwin was jammed between two coffins with a stone slab upon her chest. She was brought out unconscious and died less than 20 minutes later. So that's a little grim piece of this parish's history. Grim and interesting that the fact that this church, in its history in the 1600s and then in the 1800s, had two sextonesses, like female gravediggers. Come the 1870s, when Elizabeth was sextoness, one of the reasons that she may have been sextoness is because she wouldn't have actually, in this churchyard, been doing very much digging at all, really, because they banned burials in this place in the 1860s. It was too full up by that, and then Abney Park Cemetery and the local cemeteries and bigger cemeteries and whatnot took up the strain. But her role as sextoness by that period would have been looking after the old graves and the vaults and mausoleums and tombs and things like that. And that is what she died doing and lost her life. I'll give you one little last glimpse of St Augustine's Tower before we shoot off. And as I say, if churchyard tours are your thing, do watch, because this one is interesting. And now we're going to be ending this video and going from where old meets new. So join me for that one.